All right, let's do this. Okay. Before we get started on the Middle East, we have to start talking first and foremost about the physical landscape and the people that belong there. Before we start getting into any of these conflicts or issues or stories or economics or any of those other things, you have to talk about like what's there. All right. So to get started here, we're going to talk about the physical geography of the Middle East as well as the people that live in that physical geography. All right. So the Middle East is also known as Southwest Asia. Asia is a very large continent and has to be divided into a lot of different regions. And because of its huge amount of space, they divide up Southwest Asia. They divide Asia into multiple little places like East Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and in this case, Southwest Asia gets the name the Middle East. However, it's not just the Middle East. Many times it includes North Africa, as we're going to see in a little bit. They share common traits. We talk about what makes a region, and that would be, so a lot of times, religion. That could be a language, and that can be uh, cultural backgrounds. It could be a lot of similar uh, similar characteristics on how they practice like different holidays and cultural issues. Like there's a whole bunch of different ways that a region can be labeled as a region. And in this case, you see some of them are listed right there. Language, right there for the Arabic language. They share the religion of Islam primarily. There are other religions there which we will discuss, but primarily Islam, as well as, again, the economics, the shared concept there being oil. Okay. There are five regions, and these are what we're going to talk about first. So Islam is divided into five regions. I'm sorry, excuse me, the Middle East is divided into five regions, and those are listed right in front of you. We're going to go over these. These are the Northern Tier, the Arabian Peninsula, the Fertile Crescent, the Nile Valley, and the Maghreb, which is, again, actually separate, and we'll talk about that one in just a bit. Okay? All right, first up, let's talk about the Northern Tier. On the map you see here, it is actually circled in red. This is the mountainous high plateau region. On a physical map, you can see it because you can see that it definitely has more texture from the satellite image. It's completely higher elevation. This includes like Turkey and parts of Iran and things like that. And it's a pretty massive area, and it's very diverse. It had from fertile soil to dry and very small population. But again, this is just the first one. This is called the Northern Tier. The second region is called the Arabian Peninsula, and this is one that we're probably the most familiar with. This is the one geographically you can see from space, and it goes, it's a peninsula. It's surrounded by water on three sides, and therefore we kind of associate this with the Middle East. The largest country by far on the Arabian Peninsula is Saudi Arabia, and it's a big desert. It really is. It lacks water. There's every now and then there's the oasis, which is that fertile area of desert, um, but that would enable life to still support there because obviously a civilization can't be supported without water. So that does exist, but then there's vast areas where it does not. And on this Arabian Peninsula, we have found very large amounts of oil, and we'll talk about those countries that are benefited by oil here in just a little bit. Okay. And the last factor that's really important here is this is the birthplace of Islam, which is the fastest growing religion in the world. It is the second largest religion in the world, second to Christianity. And this is the birthplace of it. Muhammad was born in the city of Medina. Um, and then basically the home or the most holy city to Islam is Mecca. And both Mecca and Medina are located within country of Saudi Arabia, located on the Arabian Peninsula, actually located down in this area right here. Okay. Okay, the third region, that would be known as the Fertile Crescent. This one has gotten a lot of notoriety because you might be familiar with this from an ancient civilizations class you guys took in sixth grade. The Fertile Crescent is essentially primarily like Iraq, and they call it the Fertile Crescent because of the idea that things can actually grow there. Why? Water. And what are the things that are there in terms of water? Well, we have the two major rivers known as the Tigris River and the Euphrates River, hopefully we labeled those on our physical maps. So because of these rivers, you end up having rich soil, you have a lot of water, population can grow there, etc. And so therefore, civilizations have existed there for thousands upon thousands of years in this Fertile Crescent. Fourth region, which is another one very familiar with, would be the Nile Valley. Notice that this one's actually located on the African side of the Middle East, on the other side of what is known as the Red Sea. And the Nile Valley is really important because this is where ancient Egypt and as well as a lot of other ancient civilizations were able to hail from. And the important historical connections between Europe and the Fertile Crescent is completely tied into religion. This is where in the Old Testament the Jewish people were held in bondage and escaped and parted the Red Sea and left. And that is holy. That story is holy to not just Jews, but also Christians as well as Muslims. And so, again, another home to a very important, the two largest religions in the world, as well as the oldest of those three religions is Judaism. And then the final, the Maghreb is the area located in North Africa. There are very large countries there because primarily it is the Sahara Desert and mountains, known as the Atlas Mountains. North Africa is pretty inhospitable unless you're along the coast, which is where the populations reside primarily. There's more rain there. You have more of it because it's located on the Mediterranean Sea, hence the term the Mediterranean climate is what you have there. And so the people there, if you look at the extent of these countries, they're very big. But that's because nothing is in the southern part of the country because of the mountains and the desert. Okay, so Arab armies swooped through North Africa because of these mountains separating it from sub-Saharan Africa, which we'll talk about later, and this ends up creating an entire new religion, an expanse of a religion throughout a region. Therefore, this is why North Africa gets lumped in with Southwest Asia and why we call this the Middle East. All right, so because of this, one of the most valuable resources in the Middle East is oil, but the issue is it's unevenly distributed, and you're going to see that here on this map. Down, if you look at Saudi Arabia takes up a very large percentage of oil going into the world. Almost 25, a bit rounded up, it is 25%, but almost 25% of the world's oil consumption is coming from Saudi Arabia. But that doesn't mean that the other countries don't have a little bit of a say in this. In fact, the little tiny country of Kuwait ends up at 13% of the world's oil consumption, meaning it's a big player even though it's not a big country. And you see some of the other countries listed here from Iran to Iraq all the way down to Oman and the UAE, which is the United Arab Emirates. But oil, again, you see it is unevenly distributed. Therefore, some countries have more benefit of this oil. However, all countries here are actually benefiting from oil because countries like us use it a lot. Now, the people who live there, this is the ethnic diversity of the region. Primarily, they're Arab, but we will find out that there's a lot of other ethnic groups as well. We list these, the Turks, the Iranians, the Kurds. There's some of those are actually have been in some of our news stories. And so those stories that are coming out of, like in Syria, and you hear about Kurdistan or the Turkish people in places like that, those people are there as well, and those ethnicities are throughout. There's a whole bunch of ethnic groups, but when we're talking about the big ones, the largest by far would be considered the Arabic people. And it's anyone who has the native language is Arabic. It would be considered Arabic. And this is the majority of people. Right? And the very last thing, which is the obvious concept here, is that religion plays a big role. Islam's the largest, is the majority of the people in the Middle East consider themselves Muslim, which is our believers of Islam. Christianity and Judaism are important. They are the home. This is the home of those ancient religions. Well, after we talk about a little bit of the background of these, of this region, hopefully we've learned a little bit, and we'll be able to go on to some more like current event and things like that. All right, here we go.